Yeah,
Okay.
I was born in 1931, which is considered the worst economic year in the history of this country. And I was the sixth of seven, which at that time, and my mother was, I was born in April, and my mother turned 41 3 weeks later.
So you were the sixth of seven, so you're
I was
the
sixth of
next
seven.
youngest?
Yeah, sixth of seven.
Uh-huh.
There was 4 girls and 3 boys. But
And what did your parents do for a living?
oh well, my mother was would have been what at that time would have considered well born, because she was educated in the 20s and 30s, and women of Irish stock were not. Were not educated. They were working class people. But my mother came from a more educated class, and my mother was a college graduate, and she went to Catholic University in Washington for advanced work in teaching at a time when women were washing floors. But she was educated, and all her family were educated. Her brother was the conductor of this Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra, and her other brother was worked on the New York Times, and she had 4 sisters, 3 of whom were New York school teachers. And in the 20s and 30s, that was considered, that would be like now being a lawyer, because women were not educated at that time. A lot of them didn't even go to high school. They usually went to 6th or 8th grade, were married at 16 or 17, and stayed home, and their husbands worked common work, common jobs.
So it sounds like their parents were very supportive of them.
Yeah, well, yes, the whole feeling of this part of the country, where I lived in Chicopee, Massachusetts, it was a mill town, and there were factories there, and many of the immigrants worked in the factories, but the Irish, who could speak English, went into usually the police or not medicine, of course, because they weren't educated, but they would work in the humbler task in a hospital, just workers around the grounds and all that kind of thing. The uneducated ones. But my mother was educated, but when she was in her 30s, she wasn't married, and her mother was very, very upset that her daughter was not married. And my mother told me, my grandmother said, it simply doesn't look right. In those days, you could not go into a restaurant. You couldn't be seen anywhere socially alone without a companion, without a husband, or of course a boyfriend. But it was just different. The whole social structure was different. But my mother didn't have a boyfriend, and she didn't have a husband, and her mother really kind of pushed her into getting married. And my mother had fallen in love with a man when she was going to school in Washington, but he was not a Catholic. And she left Washington to come back to Chicopee, where she lived, and married my father.
How did she meet your father?
They were friends since they were children. They were in the same neighborhood. My father was always crazy about my mother, who wouldn't give him the time of day. My father came from a working, very proletarian class, but they went to the same church, they knew the same people, and my father was always crazy about my mother. He was a little younger than my mother. My mother was, I think, 33 or 34 when she was married. My father was perhaps 31, 32, something like that. But my mother didn't recover from the romance that she had in Washington, but she thought, oh well, she'll be married and she'll have My father at the time had a very, very successful trucking, coal delivery trucking business, extremely successful. This would have been in the mid-20s. So my mother thought that, well, they lived in a very fine house. My mother had servants, and she slipped into the kind of lifestyle that that was expected of her, belonging to the right kind of clubs and things. And that went on until the crash of 29, and my father lost everything, just everything. And as it happened, his sister lived in a two-family house, and my father and his sister owned together a two-family house, which my aunt lived downstairs, my father's sister lived downstairs with her family, but upstairs they had rented it. But when all this happened, they had to live in the apartment upstairs. They lost the beautiful house. My father he had a fleet of trucks.
And so how old were you?
I was not born at this time. This would have been in the 1920s. 1929, 1930.
That's
then,
right.
I was born in 1931.
Okay.
And then the last, except for my brother, who was 1934.
I see.
But once the Depression came, things got very bad. My father really never recovered financially. And my mother not only didn't recover, but she developed severe emotional problems. Serious, very, very serious emotional problems. She could not recover from being really, we were desperately poor in the beginning, 1929, right into the mid-30s, right up until actually till the war. There were 10 years that I remember were terrible. We didn't have any food. I remember eating mustard sandwiches.
Really?
Yeah, mustard. White bread and mustard, because you could buy a jar of mustard for about 2 cents. And white bread you could buy for a nickel. So somehow my father would try to scrape together that. And then we'd eat that for a week. That was what we ate. It was really desperate, and my mother couldn't handle it. It was a very bad time. It marked me very seriously for the rest of my life, because my mother was extremely difficult to live with. Yeah, it was really, really, really bad, and it was that way. But then, with the 40s, came the war, and then as the war progressed, there was, of course, more money. And then, by that time, my mother's children were growing and grown. And one by one, we got left home and got married. So the situation righted itself.
So what kinds of things did you and your siblings do in like the 1930s for like today's kids have, iPods and iPhones, and so what did you guys do?
Roller skate.
Roller skates?
Jump rope. Absolutely. I remember, it might have been 1939, 1940. I remember my mother saying to me, "What would you like? Do you want to go for your birthday? Do you want to go to the movies, or do you want a jump rope?" And I said, "I want," because it would be 10 cents. That's all she could give me. So I said, "I want a jump rope." So they bought me a jump rope for 10 cents. So that was my birthday in 1941.
And then so what were like holidays like Christmas or Easter?
Well, that we were together, and my parents were in many ways very, very, very good people. It seemed to me that there were always presents on. Number one, my father would always get a tree, but a tree would cost 25 cents, a huge, gigantic Christmas tree. So my father could always get a tree. And he had a friend who had what kind of a shop, almost like a little Home Depot. There was everything in it, but he also carried toys, and he was a very close friend of my father. And I think maybe he got toys for very little money and gave him little toys, because there was always some little toys under the tree. Not a lot. Maybe you got maybe one, but in those days that was considered what would happen. You get one, a toy at Christmas. And then some things which you would never remember now my mother would get some oranges in the winter. That was unheard of. There was no fruit in the winter in those early days. Somehow my mother, I don't know where she got the oranges, but I remember the oranges that we would have at Christmas, which we thought was miraculous. We couldn't understand how they could grow in the snow. I don't even know, I don't know where my mother got the oranges. I wonder if maybe, she had a couple of wealthy relatives, and I'm wondering if maybe they sent them. That's the only thing I can figure. But the holidays were good, and of course our church was very supportive. The festivities at the church were always, children loved that, the lights, the candles, dressing up for Christmas plays, and things like that. Those meant a lot to children at that time, because there wasn't anything like it is now. The road in front of our house wasn't even paved in the early years. That didn't come until later. So you would play, we went out in the rain to play in the summer. We didn't care if it got wet. We'd play in the rain.
And so what kinds of like games or entertainment would you and your siblings play?
You made them up yourself. I remember playing in the gutter alongside and damming up the sand so that it would make the water would fill up, and then I'd make marks so the water would slush. I would be making creating dams and like the Coolidge Dam. I thought that was such fun. But this would only be in the summer, of course. On an extremely hot day. Needless to say, no air conditioning. That was unheard of. But sometimes, at night, it was we slept in the attic, and I would say it was probably 95 in the attic. It was. I remember being up at night, being tortured with the heat. Because we were just under the eaves of the roof.
I see.
And it was unfinished, and it was very hard. But sometimes, one year, I remember we slept on the porch. We had a porch attached to the house, and my mother put some cots out there, and we slept through the night. And we just kept all the lights off so that it wouldn't attract the mosquitoes. And we just lay there in the dark because it was cooler than upstairs in the attic, which I remember was almost like torture to me. It was like 95, maybe even hotter. It could have been 100 degrees under the eaves and the hot, because it was cold in the heat. It was very, very, very hard at that time. But it wasn't, you thought it was very hard, but nobody thought anything about it, because there's no such thing as air conditioning, and there was no money to finish it off, which my father, being a very skillful carpenter, could have done, but there was never any money. Until the war, there was just no money. We lived in great poverty.
And so when you were young, which of your siblings were you closest to, do you think? Which of your siblings were you closest to when you were young?
Well, actually, not really very close, because the two that were above me, my brother Bill and my brother Jim, they were boys, and I was a little girl, and so they weren't interested in playing my games with me, because I'd have a doll or something, and I'd want to play house. They wouldn't be interested. They'd be out in the sand lot playing, not baseball, but
like stickballs.
Stickball. That kind, because there's no money. You didn't have a bat or a ball or anything. But there was a field near our house, and they'd go over there and play stickball with their male friends. So they wouldn't be playing with me. Then the next one to them would be my sister. But by that time, when I was 10, she was already in her teens.
I see.
And at that point, the gap is too big.
Right.
Later on, of course, we spent a lot of time together. But 10 and 14, a little girl 10 and a girl 14 and a girl 15 don't share anything at that age. Because a little girl. And the other thing is, when I was 10, that was much younger than a 10-year-old is now. Nowadays, 10-year-old girls, well, because of television and travel, and as you say, the kinds of toys they have, they mature much faster. They're much more aware of their surroundings than we were. You didn't go anywhere in those days. You played it. You were at home. You stayed in your block. You know, you didn't go places the way children do now. My father had a car. That's because, according to this,
so loud sirens.
My father had gone into plumbing after he lost his business, and so he had to have a car to go around to different places to. He was a plumber. He went to houses to fix the leaks and so on and so forth. It was much simpler than it is now. But because of that, he always had a car. So we did take some trips to our relatives, you know, and Christmas Eve we'd go and visit an aunt, that kind of thing, and little family trips like that. But nothing like, it was a totally different world, much narrower world than it got to be later. So it was just different. No, I wasn't close to my siblings at that time.
Did you have friends on the block?
Well, yes. I actually, we lived in, interestingly enough, it was a Polish neighborhood. It had originally been all Irish immigrants. The Irish had left, and then the new rush of Polish would come in because it was a mill town, and they could get a job working at the mill, even though they couldn't speak English, not much English, and could speak a little bit, but they couldn't. And Polish are the hardest working people. I grew up with them. I know them. I'm very, very familiar with them, and I have huge respect for them. Hard workers. So the little girls I played with were Polish. They were first generation. Their mothers did not speak. Their parents did not speak English. A lot of them. But of course, like all immigrants groups after a few years, they did indeed speak English because their children spoke English.
Right.
So it was also sociologically, it was very interesting. The changes that were taking place at the time. But I did not have a happy childhood. I was not happy. No, it was not. The disaster of the depression with my mother's illness killed any chance. But they were very. My father was a very hard worker. My brothers, from the time they were 14, always worked. My brothers were very hard workers. Of course, they went to high school. They didn't go to college. They didn't want to, but they went to high school. But very, very hard worker. Well, I didn't know anybody that wasn't a hard worker because you had to survive. Everybody worked long, hard hours, and there was no such thing as having 2-week vacations. That wasn't anything that I knew as a child. People didn't go on paid vacations. That was that was unheard of. So life was much harder and narrower and simpler. So much so that it's hard to remember how different it was. Yeah. But no, I did not have a happy childhood. I wasn't happy at all. No, very bad childhood.
It doesn't sound like it was a lot of fun.
No, it was very harsh. Unfortunately, my mother, who was really a remarkable woman in many ways, beautiful and intelligent, and well loved by everybody who knew her, the emotional illness took a great toll. She was very hard on me. Very, very hard. I'm afraid I have to say that I was her whipping boy. Yeah. The other, my oldest sister was taken to New York to live when she was 12 by her godmother, because that would be my mother's. My mother had very successful sisters living in New York City, and in the time of the Depression, the city of New York continued to pay its teachers.
I see.
So my aunts were still working, had money, and had very nice apartments. And my mother's sister, who was my oldest sister, that's my sister there, who is now in the nursing home. When she was 12, her godmother and her aunt, who was also her aunt, my mother's sister, took her to live with her and raised her in New York City. My sister went to lived with her aunt right up until the time she was married. She came home for vacation in the summer and so on, but she was gone by that time. She became a different kind of person. But my aunt had money and opportunity, and she said, why don't I take Jean and put her in a very lovely school, and she'll have clothes, she'll have friends, she'll have everything, which she did. She lived very, very well by those standards. We thought of that as like being a movie star. We just couldn't believe it.
And what was your schooling experience like?
I'm sorry?
What was your schooling experience like?
I was very unhappy, very, very unhappy. I was not popular at all. For one thing, what you forget is when I was there, I was so poor, I would be dressed practically in rags. I was never clean, never taken care of, my hair never brushed. My mother had given up on us. She did not take care of her children after a certain point. She just couldn't. No, she emotionally, she was serious problem. So it wasn't until I was much older, even in high school. The other thing is, by that time, I was pretty emotionally damaged myself. So I wasn't able really to scramble together until really I was an adult. That was the only time when I could pull everything together. And by that time, a year before I was married, my mother died of cancer. And it was unfortunately because at that time, they didn't know what to do with cancer. It was very difficult. Matter of fact, today is the 60th anniversary of her death.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
July 17th. Yeah. 1954. Yeah. And after my father was 61, and he never recovered. He never recovered from her death in the sense that he was really never happy, but he was such a strong-willed man that he continued to do work and so on. And my father was very good to me. Yeah, my mother was not, but my father was very good to me. It's hard to put yourself in this métier because it's sociological and economical and generational. There was so much going on because it was the teeth of the Depression, which were the worst years economically in the history of this country. So I was right in the middle of all that. So all those forces were affecting all of us, but me particularly because of my mother's unfortunate fall into emotional illness. So it was not a happy, not happy, ever happy as a child. But I got along. I had some old friends in the neighborhood and so on. We lived on my roller skates. And Joe was a good jump roper. Those are the kind of things you did. Went to the park. There was a couple of parks, but they'd have some jungle gyms. That's what you did. You didn't go away. You didn't have any adventures like that. So families didn't go away. No, nobody had any cars right up until the 50s. As I say, I've been playing out in the summer rain, building dams and things like that. I was barefoot. It was summer rain. It was fine. There was no cars going by. None. There might be one or two an entire day. So it was safe for me to go there. There was no problem. People didn't have cars in the 30s. That was even the people that lived quite decently, like the grocery store man lived very decently. He lived near us on the next street. He lived very decently. He didn't own a car. We were considered unusual. We had a car, but that's because the only reason that we had it was because the state allowed you to have a car if you needed one. So it really is a sociological kind of story rather than just like his story of his life would be so much different because he lives in a stable economy. So it's not like mine, which was really very harsh, very harsh childhood.
Well, thank you, Fe. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about it, but it tended to make us really very tough and self-supporting and independent. Which my siblings were all like that. All the women very independent. My brothers, the best men you'd ever want to know. They were strong, loyal, family men. Always worked. Wonderful to their children. Wonderful to their wives. Very, very stable. Even not coming out of a stable environment, it made them tough.
Sounds like you looked up to your brothers a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I love my brothers. Yeah, my brothers were wonderful. Yeah, I only have one now. My youngest brother, Tom. He's one you would love. He's a wonderful man. And my brother Bill only died when I was 80. And he came to my 80th birthday party, even though by that time he was only 6 months away from dying from cancer. But he made the trip. That's the kind of person he was. And you wouldn't know he was sick. He cut his tongue out before he'd admit that he was in pain or tired or anything. He would not talk about it. And in 6 months he was dead.
Wow, it's such a different generation.
Yeah, he was a very tough guy. My father was a very tough guy, very hard working. He had lost his father as a child, and in his generation, that was the generation before, that was the immigrants. He was an immigrant's child, and by the time he was 14, he was considered an adult, had to go to work and help support his mother. So his life was very harsh too, but he was a very strong man. But he had a tender heart, very strong. My father was very good to me, very, very good. I think he's the only reason that I kept what little sanity I had. But he was a wonderful, kind, good man. And he was a role model for my 3 brothers, obviously, because they were just like him. They turned out exactly. My brother Bill was so much like him, it actually made me a little nervous. The speech mannerisms, everything about it, the way he reacted. They even voted all the time. They wouldn't dare not vote Democrat. But no, they were very, very. I came from very good people. Even with my mother was an unfortunate case, but that was an isolated case. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it just made life very hard for us. But and it's unfortunate that by the time she got very sick, by that time things were starting to be easier. We were all there was only two of the 7 who was not married. Myself and my younger brother. All the others were away, so they no longer had the responsibility of a big family or having to take care of children or anything. It was just, I was an adult, and my brother, 3 years younger than I was, but he had, he went to work every day. They didn't have to take care of us anymore. But unfortunately, my mother had cancer, and it was very bad. 60 years ago, cancer was very bad, very, very bad. Yeah. So it was too bad because in those years, that's when they were in their beginning of their 60s. My
Uh-huh.
mother was 63 when she died.